I love going fast. You know, a lot of my friends go, yeah, Wink's bikes they're faster than a speeding ticket, you know. My real nickname is Wink, but you know, people out on the salt, they call me the Salt Hillbilly. You know, all the guys come out to Bonneville and they bring these multi-million-dollar rigs out, and they have all these expectations, and they get humbled really quick because the salt has a way of doing it to you. Bonneville is a very, very mystical place. It'll put you in your place in a hurry. To date, I've got 67 land speed records as of my last AMA record that I got at the Bub Meet. It's been a long journey, but fun. The fastest that I've gone is 224 unofficially. It's what we call out the back door, and but the problem being with tires and having safe vehicles, you don't want to outrun your equipment. I've been hurt a lot. I fell off a bike at 182 miles an hour. You know, I went down at Bonneville this year at 192 miles an hour, and was able to keep the bike up on two wheels and actually, you know, get off the course safely and not get, you know, hurt too bad. I'll take the cardboard and lay it out, and then what we'll do is this will get laid out on here and leave a little extra, probably about somewhere around, you know, 1.5 to 1.25 inches extra. We'll work off a center right here, and then right here's the seat part. So we'll come down and just, it's nice because you can bend this right in and you can feel right where the seat is. With that seam being right there in the corner of the radius, that makes it stronger. If you were to try to butt weld it all together, it would oil can and flex back and forth. If you bring the two seams together like this and then weld them and then work it and file it, and the weld and everything will end up being the same exact width as what the material is, and it's just as strong. The weld will be just as strong as the material itself. And so what we'll do, we'll bring it down and we'll add probably close to an inch and a half, just like what we did on the back. These two sheets of aluminum, my cost on it was right at a little over $300, and I just don't want to make scrap out of it because scrap doesn't pay that much money. I'm really shooting for on this bike is to have something over the top and you know, something that just not everybody is going to Bonneville with. And this piece right here is going to be one of the major structure points of this bike, because we have a mount here and a mount here, but this is going to keep this body nice and rigid the way this is designed. And believe it or not, the aerodynamics, it doesn't need to come out to a knife edge. It can be cut off like this, and the airflow coming off the body, it'll you know, not have any turbulence or anything on the back side. And a motorcycle being so narrow and so tall, we're always struggling out there on the salt, because the wind comes up from the side and it takes this and it wants to blow it over, and then all of a sudden it turns into an airplane wing and the thing will just take off flying. So that's one of the problems that you have with a motorcycle. One of the things that I stay away from and using rivets out at Bonneville is we're around the salt conditions so much that the salt gets in between the two pieces of material and what it'll do, it'll actually start corroding and just start pushing the rivets apart and things like that. And the neat thing is there's some 3M products out now that, believe it or not, that we can use an adhesive and glue our gussets and glue in our structure on the inside, and we don't have to worry about it corroding. When I do fabrication, my favorite material to work with is, number one, is aluminum. It's super easy to work with, it's clean to work with. Plus, aluminum, it doesn't corrode right off the bat like, you know, if you got a piece of steel, carbon steel, it seems like as soon as you're not even finished with the project and it's got a lot of rust all over it. And then secondly, I like working with stainless. It's an alloy that once you get finished with it, you don't have to chrome plate it. You can polish it one time. It's never gonna corrode on you. Once it gets welded, we'll take a planishing hammer and we'll beat it until it's the same thickness as the material is. And what it does, that expands it out a little bit, where you may have to work the material a little bit more, and you may have to take a torch and heat it up and put a wet sponge on it with cold water and shrink it up. But the neat thing is when you get done with aluminum, if you normalize the aluminum, it's not as brittle and it's not going to crack. It's going to get tricky. It'll be not that hard to shape this piece, but when you get back to where this wider part is, then you have a compound curve where it's flat on the back. That's going to help us. The secret to doing aluminum work, one of the secrets, is annealing the aluminum. It's actually taking the hardness out of the aluminum. And this, I learned this from Simon. It's pretty much a lost art. Now what you want to do is we're gonna light this, and then you're gonna see some black soot coming off of this, and that's just the acetylene gas. Okay, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna do it to where just the black soot, and I don't want to do it much because that stuff gets all over. And what we do is we're gonna soot this up all the way around, just like that. Okay, now that right there is our guide. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna light the torch. I'm gonna heat up this aluminum until that black soot goes away. And what that's gonna do, that's enough to make the aluminum soft to work with it, so that it doesn't crack when I'm bending it. The materials, you're gonna see the material twist a little bit. And so you just heat it up until this black goes away. You don't have to worry about it in the center as much as you do out where you're gonna shrink and stretch your material. If I can pass it on, then I don't mind passing on, because, you know, somebody else is gonna have to learn how to do it. I wish that every day when I'm down here working that I had a young chap to work with me that I could show him, you know, and he could work with me every day, and I could pass on a lot of my, you know, things that I've learned over the years and pass it on to him. But it seems nowadays it's really hard to find that level of a person. My father always taught me to be a mechanic, and if I chose a field that I was gonna go out and do for the rest of my life, he said, you know, what you want to do is you want to work with your hands, because if you work with your hands, you'll be able to make anything you want to make in life. When you make it, that's going to teach you what that part's all about. That's going to teach you, if something happens to that part, what you have to do to make it better. the ring that you get, you can hear that we've still got a dull, and when it gets to where the metal wants to ring like a bell, and you can hear that ring, that's a hard piece of metal. And as long as it's got that thud to it, it's not going to crack, you know, and it's still soft enough to work with. And you just got to be patient with it, because if you get in a hurry, it'll tell you who's boss, right? It'll tell you in a hurry. It's coming out really good. To me, I can picture this whole body finished. We got all of our material cut out for the tail section. It's going to be a lot of time on the English wheel. There's a lot of contours that we're going to have to work with. Actually, we'll be using a nitrogen bottle, and it's something that's nice and sturdy. It doesn't give, and it works really well because there's so many different curves on this bottle that that you'll end up using doing shaping a piece of metal. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this, we're going to lay it down, and then we're going to pull this back, and I'll eyeball and get it somewhat close to where we want it, and then I'll just simply pull it up on this. And as far as where it's looking right now, it looks like I'm going to have to put a little bit more in it right here, and I'm just getting the preliminary bend on it, and then what I'll do is I'll shape the rest of it with the wheel. As I'm trying to get this to where it's like a dish, a little bit of a dish this way, so that we can fudge. When I'm up against this, I can actually fudge a little bit. My leathers are going to fill in right here, and you're actually going to see the whole top of my body from the top. Looking down this way, you're going to see my butt fitting in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to fudge this just a little bit. And what it's doing, you can see it's just working the metal until it's getting concave right here, and then I'll get back and I'll hammer on it on that cylinder, and I'll bring this back to shape. Once I get it concave, then we'll roll it back and just worry about getting this outside almost 4 inches back into shape. Bring a little bit of shape in from right here to here. What I'm doing is I'm sculpturing those lines into this piece of material, and then the little divots and the little dents and the dings and everything else, it'll all get worked out. And sooner or later it'll all be this smooth, but it's going to have nice contours to it, and it's going to have like a sexy feel, like you're running your hand down across a woman's back and you get to her butt and, you know, go around her butt. I mean, it's just that right there to me. I don't know. My wife might get mad, but I don't know. I think I'm working on my mistress here. was like Christmas here a few weeks ago. Just about got everything here for the new X-Wedge engine from S&S. To the naked eye, it may not look like much, but for these 3 nuts, not being able to tighten up those pulleys could mean the difference between me going 35 miles an hour and 235 miles an hour. And the difference between this X-Wedge and a lot of conventional Harley engines, one of the biggest things, the crank assembly on an X-Wedge, instead of being your conventional 3-piece or 5-piece crankshaft, this is a forged piece of steel. I'm hoping to make somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 horsepower, and it's that day-old saying, some bikes are pretty, some bikes do have a function. My bikes, I build them for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is speed. That little bitty sharp edge right there, that makes all the difference in the world. I mean, if I was to leave that sharp edge right there, if you actually took a torch and hit that, that would get a hot spot right there, and it would turn glowing red. And what it's going to do, it's going to create a hot spot in there just enough to pre-ignite the fuel as it comes in, and that's having the spark in there at the wrong time. And when you don't have the spark in there at the right time, it's going to create detonation, and it's going to make the engine run sluggish. So what I'm going to do is all these rough areas right here, I'm going to just feather those over and smooth them out a little bit, and just make sure that we don't have any sharp edges. Had I not taken all the time to deburr all these edges and everything on this piston, it could have melted down the whole piston where I wouldn't have been able to even run the engine. I would have had to change out the whole engine. And a lot of people, they go, piston's a piston, a head's a head, just throw it together and just let it run, But you know what, if you do these little things, that's why that engine out there is still running. That's what I account my 67 land speed records to. That is one of the things that I can account to getting that many records. Even though here at my shop, I use one of the oldest tools known, in a fabrication shop, a acetylene torch, English wheel, and I hand form the aluminum, weld up the chassis, do all the old school style fabrication and everything. I'm definitely not afraid to come into the new world of technology as far as digital, fuel injection, and using a laptop. It's one of those things that we can use the best of both worlds and just pull a conglomeration of old school, new technology, and just make this thing over the top. When you look at this head compared to a conventional S&S head, it's night and day. There are very few similarities. The engine case is a completely new engine case. I've had people come in the shop and they've looked at it and they were like, oh my God, what kind of engine is this? And I explained to them, it's an S&S X-Wedge. It's got 3 camshafts in it, where you got your Evolution has 1 camshaft. Your twin cams obviously have two camshafts. This X-Wedge has 3. It has 1 intake camshaft, which has 2 intake lobes on it, and then each one of the exhaust cam has 1 separate lobe for that exhaust valve to be actuated. I've found a couple of places in these castings right here. They're really, really rough. And so what I'll do, since I'm going to be taking the valve springs and the valves out, I'll go in here with a Dumor and clean up all these castings. And that way, if there's any little loose castings that's going to fall off, instead of it falling off going into the oil and contaminating the oil with a piece of debris that may, you know, mess up the engine bearings, I would rather go in there and clean it up. I was talking with a real good friend of mine, T-Rod from Illusion, and he had told me that he had started building a tank for a bike for his dad, and then you know, his dad passed away, and he goes, man, I'd feel honored if you had this tank on your bike. And when he first brought it over, it was a pretty wide tank and everything. And so what we did, we cut down the tank and then came up with the idea of the way I wanted it was so that the backbone, you know, stuck out, but it had a really nice style to it. However, it was a challenge to get all the pockets made in the back, and T-Rod's been working on this for me. This is made out of 80 thousandths thick 3003, and it's going to be a super strong tank. Whenever we make a run with the SCTA, the club that I belong to, we get timing tags, and I've always wanted to build a bike that I could actually put the timing tags as I've received them and either set a record or made a pass on the bike. And I wanted to be able to put them right on the bike. I'm really proud of the 67 of them that I have, is getting these red ones, because that means you've set a record in that class and nobody else has gone as fast as you've gone. I've got 67 of these red ones. And I made this. There's no way to get this in and out of there without making this a slip fit. And I almost screwed up, and I almost welded the tubing to it, and it has to turn like that right there, or you cannot get it out. And I didn't find that out and I almost had it all welded together, and I was like, if I do that, how am I going to get it out past this hole? And man, that would have been the ultimate mistake. This turbo makes so much heat that what it would do, there's a chance that it would just torch out the whole side of the head right there. I mean, when you look at the size of the cylinders, and it actually looks like it's you know, 2 cylinders of a radial engine off of an airplane. I want the turbo in this area right here, not just depend on the turbo hanging off an exhaust, which gets super, super hot on these things. It almost gets so hot you can see through it. What I've come up with is, with this template, that's basically where I want the turbo setting, because this thing is rubber mounted and everything's going to be moving around. I just don't want the turbo, you know, just flopping loose and breaking off a header mount or something like that. One of the reasons that you need to have the turbo really secure on the engine is, with the turbo, we have an oil supply line that goes on, and this oil supply line is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 55 to 60 psi of oil pressure. And the last thing we need is what happened to me with my streamliner, having an oil line break because the turbo sagged with the exhaust getting hot. The turbo sagged down and it made the oil line get really tight, and it fractured the oil line, spewed the oil onto a super red hot turbo, popped into a full-blown fire, and then the oil kept feeding the fire. You've got all these individual cogs, the area that all the power has to go through, when you look at it, it's very, very, very thin right here, but it's a real super strong Kevlar material. And the thing is having the belt alignment perfect. That way you have all this area that it's actually as strong or stronger than a chain, and it weighs like probably a tenth of what a chain weighs. And anytime you can cut down on your rotating weight, you're going to make more power. And with me, you know, that's what it's all about. And as the RPM goes up in the engine, these counterweights push over and they actually lock up the clutch to where the clutch doesn't slip. And that's going to be able to enable me to take a 132-inch motor and put upwards, you know, in the amount of 300 horsepower and getting the horsepower to the back wheel without slipping, you know, to keep the power all the way to the rear wheel so you're not losing it in the clutch plates. You can't just go down and just buy a turbo kit for these things. You have to develop it yourself, and there again, it's a lot of trial and error. Well, it's been a few months since you've last seen the bike. Since then, we've actually got the bike all completely put together and everything. And it's a specialty built class. It's not to where you can take a production bike and run in the A class. It's a purpose built just for that class. And the P stands for push rod, and then the B stands for either blown or turbocharged. And then this is the fuel class, which is gas, and we'll be running gasoline in this. We have to run ERC gas in this. Once we get up there, we have to buy the gas from the fuel truck up there. They'll seal the tank. If we go into impound to break a record, if the tank has been tampered with, then that forfeits you from that run. You have to empty out your complete fuel tank, have them put new fuel in it, and go back and attempt another record. It's a variable fuel injection from S&S, and it has its own module, and what we use from Harley-Davidson is just the wire loom for a Delphi unit. Now I've got it hooked up on the gauge to where I can see all the ECM gauges, and I can tell that the throttle position sensor is working. As you can see, everything is on right here, but if you get thrown away from the bike, this pulls off and it shuts off everything. It shuts off all the electrical to the whole bike. See, we have a problem. If we don't have a RPM reading every time I hit the starter. We don't have it. One of the reasons that the electronic phase is taking over is because a carburetor is a real crude way of dispensing fuel into a combustion engine. It's because if you understand how a carburetor works completely from idle to wide open throttle, I think it really comes really easy to you to be able to tune and be able to use electronic fuel injection and mapping and changing the cells and making an engine run as efficient as you can. Why did you put one gauge black and the rest of them silver? Well, the main gauge on here is the tachometer. When I go through the mile marker, I want to see where the tach is. I use the tach for shifting purposes, and I don't want to run it up and hit the rev limiter, because all you're doing is you're wasting time hitting the rev limiter. I want to run it up right up to the rev limiter, and then I want to feel out the bike and make sure that the bike is not spinning, and find out exactly what RPM in different gears that it may be spinning. The other gauge that we have is a boost gauge right here. Anything over to the right side of the zero is pressure in the manifold, and that is what we consider boost. And what it is the exhaust is turning the turbine down there, and it's turning the pressure side of the turbine, and it spins the opposite turbine, and that turbine builds pressure. It goes from the turbo in through the intercooler and cools the charge, and then goes through the plenum and into the intake tract where it mixes with the fuel, and it makes a really good burn, plus makes a ton of power. I'm going to be looking for between 15 and about 16 pounds of boost. That'll be when we're making our record runs. When I'm breaking in the engine, we're going to be running right at about 10 to 12 pounds of boost, and I'll keep it down to 10 to 12. We'll check, make sure we don't have any wheel speed when I get back. I'll do a download on the data acquisition. I'll be able to tell whether the rear wheel was spinning faster than the front wheel, and then if it is, we'll make changes on the shock adjustment, the swing arm angle, and try to get our squat just right so that we're transferring weight to the rear wheel during the run. Fuel pressure is real critical with a fuel injected engine. This engine is set up to where we don't want any higher than 60 pounds of pressure. If you get over 60 pounds of pressure, what will happen is the pressure up against the fuel injector itself, it won't be able to open up and distribute the fuel. And so we want to keep the fuel pressure under 60 pounds, but we don't want it getting lower than about 55. So we'll keep it between 55 and 60 pounds. The heart of the engine is the oil pump, and I always like having the oil gauge everything right where I can see them. These are liquid filled gauges, so they can take the vibration. I got in a pretty bad accident and I screwed up my left leg really bad, and so I haven't been able to use my shifting leg. So what we did, we got with the guys, Wayne Pingle, and the guys at Pingle set us up with an air shifter. And what it is I have an onboard nitrogen tank over on this side. It holds 160 PSI, and I can refill right here at this Schrader valve, and we're able to shift by just pushing this button. You don't have to touch the clutch, let up on the gas or anything. It's just while you're in the run, when it gets up to the RPM that you want to shift at, you just push the button with your left thumb and it's into the next gear. We've got this spaghetti of hoses hooked up to it, and what you have to do is you have to come off the pressure side of the plenum, and what it'll do is these hoses right here, this hose going up to this controller controls the boost that the turbo is putting out, which what this does, this controls the wastegate up in the front. This small pipe is hooked up to the wastegate. When it gets up to a certain pounds of pressure, if it goes over that, it'll blow off the wastegate, let out the exhaust right here, but keep the turbo spinning so it doesn't lose boost. And then the main exhaust comes out the large tube. And now we also have, coming off of this manifold, we've got a vacuum line and a pressure line that goes back to the fuel pressure regulator. And then as the boost goes up, it raises the fuel pressure to the fuel injectors so that they all stay in sync all the way up through the whole range of boost and the whole range of horsepower that we're trying to get the engine to peak at. The actual rim is made out of forged aluminum. They start out with a like a pill about probably 7 or 8 inches in diameter, and it gets squashed at a high rate of pressure, and then it makes a dish, and then they they spin out the dish on a mechanical lathe and then do it on a CNC and cut it all out and lighten it up. And it just super strong, really rigid, and ultra lightweight. If you did get into a tank slapper, it would just, you know, break your hands to try to hang on to the handlebars. And what this does, it slows down the rate of oscillation in the front end. Actually, with these steering stops being adjustable like this, down the road, this can be a street-driven bike. So anytime you have a blow-through turbo system or a supercharged system that is on the back side of the butterfly in the throttle body, you have to have a blow-off valve, and so that way when you let up on the throttle, if there's 20 pounds of boost coming in here, it'll escape from right here, and it's just air pressure escaping. It doesn't have the fuel mixture in it yet because it's downstream. That keeps from bending the throttle shaft or warping the butterfly, and so that you would have good constant throttle all the time. We have a runner. Isn't that amazing? A battery.
That's what I said. It comes down to the simplest thing.
It all comes down to the good old battery.